right. Um, I was not prepared for this. I should have been prepared for this because I scheduled it. Um, but I was not because I try to do too many things. And I was currently trying to snake my bathtub drain quickly before I started the stream. And I like to, because I don't like to plan things, I live my life practically the same way that I talk like this. I just do this, do this, do this, do this, and then pretty soon I'm overwhelmed and ticked off. So, what up, a couple of my boys? Dallas, greetings. Upcycle. I talk about you probably upcycle. So Chad sent me um this thing to watch. What's the guy's name? Steve. How would you even say it? Steve, the Hungarian cat. Not Steve Jobs, Steve Juice. What's up, Kato? And so I watched this video on it, and I don't know, I loved it. I like that guy. He seems really cool. He seems to me to be like a poet, visionary, and he's trying to talk about things now, starting in English in a lot of ways. Also, are you Hungarian, or do you speak Hungarian? But it seemed to me to be very much an evolution of consciousness type thing, which is very much um, my vein, and it's where I love to roll. And so the topics this morning are community and masculine and feminine. And so I don't know, Phlebas, what up, buddy? Good to see you here to tell me when I'm being ridiculous when I say things about Calvinism or whatever. Speaking Greek. Okay, got it. Um, so I have a buddy who may pop on here. I don't know. I sent him the link. Who's a local friend who is not super familiar with Little Corner. He's become more so because he participates in Estuary and the local estuary here that Paul PVK likes to call out and say that we're like not getting our shit together. Maybe CW will see this morning and jump on or something as well. I didn't let him know I was doing it, but theoretically, CW and I could have done it together. CW, if you see this right now, drive over to my house and join me in person. Um, so this buddy, back to my friend. So I'll call him. Yeah, I'll say Dan. Uh, great. So Vivian. You like to. I think if you're the Vivian from the comments, you are an outspoken person who self-identifies as female, and I'm assuming you're biologically female. Abby, great. This would be. What's DW mean? This is so, man, I could just talk about this comment for a very long time. Ah, so what up, Tyler? So Vivian has been around for a long time. I think Paul just talked about Vivian too. So this buddy Dan and I, basically, we talk about masculine and feminine a lot. I don't want to talk too much about him. I don't want to put too much about him out there. And in order to lay into our conversations and give the context, which I normally like to do, I'd have to disclose things that I don't know that he's willing to disclose. Yeah, totally. Totally. We need more Vivian pushback. And it's actually, this is all connected to, so my name, my subname or whatever that I put in here, right? What is it? Communer or ideological NPC sleeper. Are we, and it's related to that video a little bit that Steve, I don't know how you'd say it, Joos. And he was talking about this. He had a screenshot. Matthew, what up? Parlato. He had a screenshot. I'm gonna check it out and maybe show what it is because I haven't figured out how to do my screen sharing stuff. But he has this thing. Can I do this? Will you guys be able to see? Oh, not without the reflections. That's terrible. There we go. So he has this thing where it's like this. It's a U-shaped journey, right? The ego journey. Wow, this is awful. So you sleeper, prisoner of norms defined by patterns, woke. You're like on a quest. It's self discovery. You're in crisis, freedom and chaos, passions, emotional, and then faithfulness, pistis, maybe where you found meaning, structure, and purpose. So, like, this is his frame that he's working with. Sherry, what up, girl? Feel free when I put in the link too. I want to set up a context, but feel free to jump in if you want because I know you and Nate aren't doing your thing, your normal, your what is it now? It's Dante, right? Another woman. Oh, good lord. Really? So here's the thing. I think critical theory. I would love to talk a lot more. I had the idea of talking about a podcast with my friend Dan. Yeah, two men talking about masculine, feminine, spirituality because we're both very emotional, stereotypically, and even psychologically and temperamentally with the studies that science has done. The science shows that women, as a rule, there are exceptions, and it's not an either or. We are all both masculine and feminine. I get it. But women, biological women, as a rule, tend to be more like they have certain strengths and weaknesses. And men, as a rule, have certain strengths and weaknesses, and masculine and feminine, and certain energies and neurological tendencies, all that stuff, right? Um, my local friend and myself are much more feminine. I've joked about like I'm more feminine than most women and more masculine than a lot of men. It's true in ways. Like I'm very weird in ways. I'm very big five personality stuff. 88th percentile compassion. So like, which is I don't. I mean, I have no idea how many standard deviations it is away from the norm for a man. I should wear lipstick. No, that would not be necessarily what I'm going for. That would be falling into a binary, theoretically. Potentially. Could be. Maybe I just like lipstick. Um, so uh, it's very high compassion. It's a component of agreeableness. Statistically, women are much higher in agreeableness than men. Um, that's is it good or bad? We'll see. It depends. It all depends on how you interact in the world. Labels, again, adverbial. I would bring in John Vervaeke, adverbial versus adjectival. Adjectival is just a label. It's a description. It's a name. It's credo. Yeah, no shit, Vivian. I am not agreeable. I get it. You're probably an exception. If you are a biological female, you're an exception. In the same way that I'm an exception, right? For a guy. I am my agreeableness breaks down into two subcategories, politeness and compassion. I think my agreeableness, I'll just look it up. It's like 33rd or something. And talked about this a lot, so whatever, forgive me. But because it's interesting. It's fascinating to me and it's just weird because it's unusual. My agreeableness, so politeness and compassion, my politeness is first percentile. So that means basically I'm more comfortable saying things than than if you're in a room 1 out of 100 people, I'm more comfortable saying things. Um, and other people, a lot of people aren't. Like that's super, not normal. So okay, agreeableness, 32nd percentile. So politeness first. I'll say whatever. I'm very comfortable saying things, but it's the other half of it is my 88th percentile compassion, which is very weird. So that when I'm unhealthy, that makes me essentially codependent. Um, I'm very uncomfortable often saying the discernments or the judgments that politeness, that one first percentile politeness would naturally, like if I had lower compassion, I would be like a very brutal person because I would say very hard things to people who probably didn't want to hear it, often, and be perfectly comfortable doing that. However, I'm not really comfortable doing that because of my very high compassion. I don't like making other people uncomfortable, but I'm very like Jordan Peterson. I have a really similar big five to him, almost identical. My agreeableness is almost identical to Michaela Peterson's actually. Um, but it's a fascinating thing. Anyhow, whatever. Um, so masculine and feminine conversations about them I find to be dumb, usually. Not dumb, not even dumb. unwise. They're just because, right, critical theory I mentioned. Critical theory shows us that you can't ever essentially, like, you can't ever absolutize anything into a certain well, it's not this aspect of critical theory. It's intersectionality. That's what I'm saying. Connected to critical theory shows you that you can't absolutize any label. It's like man. Sorry, I'll take that down. Man, woman, there are rules, but there are exceptions, right? It's centers, peripheries, centers and peripheries. Everything's like that. Vision's like that. Focus, but you need periphery. Any body has a center and a periphery. Your heart out to your peripheral limbs, and it's related to life and importance or whatever. And I said, and I'll stick by this. I said this about 10 years ago when I was on Twitter. The conservative impulse is to exclude and deny the fringe, and the progressivist impulse is to normalize the fringe, and both are wrong. So um within certain groups, you could take a very low agreeableness woman and you want to like push her out. You could be like, she's a loud, opinionated, you know, pain in the ass, whatever kind of negative label you want to put on it, or trope that you want to put on it. But you shouldn't, because those people are helpful. That like I said a while ago, we should lionize, and we should probably institutionalize the heretics. I was just listening to a podcast this morning that I hadn't gotten through because I couldn't focus on it. It's too heady, about Origin that Jedediah sent me. And sorry, I'm not engaging with the comments because they'll distract me too much, and I'm already space case. So about Origin, and it showed this icon of Origin, which Origin has not been typically put into iconography because he was condemned a heretic, even though he's like the father of a lot of Christian, like most Christian theology, and a lot of philosophy, and a lot of canonized, sainted early church fathers learned from Origin. And so, link the video on Origin, please. Sherry could probably do it. It's entitled. Sorry, I just looked at the comments, didn't I? I distracted myself. It's very good. The audio's not great, but it's super, super good. Intersectionality, a word I did not think I would hear in this community. Listen, I'm here to surprise you, Abby. It's Charles Stang, Flesh and Fire. It's Intellectual Deep Web is the thing, but it's just a lecture that he gave. Charles Stang, Stang, Flesh and Fire, Intellectual Deep Web. You'd be able to find it. And it's really good. And so, but like the icon, what I like about it, it's cool. It's probably not, I'm sure most Orthodox bishops and pastors and metropolitans and authorities would not, I don't know, they might not agree with me, but I like it because he's a heretic, right? He doesn't have a halo around him, but he's standing on this elevated pedestal, teaching all these saints beneath him. Man, it's so great, man. It's just great. Like you have to listen to the outsiders. You have to listen to the dissenters. You have to listen to the people that aren't just status quo, particularly in today's modern age, because maybe the other piece that I'll bring in, and then I'll drop the link. Origin is a saint. I don't care what anyone says. Who learns? Some of us learn intersectionality officially. Yeah, you have the accredited, authoritative, expert witness fallacy. The true experts have taught you about intersectionality. So that's valid. That's legitimate, right? I don't know. I heard Ian McGilchrist the other day quote Schopenhauer, I think. No, yeah, Schopen. Yeah, I think that's who it was. But he said something like, never read books. Books are for people who don't have their own ideas. And I was just like, amen, brother. I'm going to put it in, Abby. So like this, but this gets into the questions. Paul's been wrestling with this. What is fundamentalism? What is heresy? What is Christianity? The last piece I want to throw in is I watched Dave Rubin, who, whatever. Dave Rubin, like most things, love and hate him. He's great in some ways, frustrates me in some ways, like most things. But he was on Bill Maher, and there's some left political pundit who identifies as left, whatever. Even like that dichotomy, whatever, left and right, like they're fake, usually for the most part. But they were talking about uh, like bigotry and nationalism, and Dutch, like wanting to preserve Dutchness and Dutch values. Like that's a good thing, but like not just Dutch whiteness. But like where how does that work? What are the lines between those things? And that's probably like a heretical question to even ask, right? Um, should you and Bill Maher was like, well, that's why I like America, is because it's about the values. It's about ideas. We are a nation centered around ideas. We hold these things to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. We have these rights in America. So we are centered. But this is the Peter Rollins thing. He would argue that that's not communion, because communion is to gather around a common lack, which is inherently relational and progressive and in the spiral and dynamic. It's alive. Whereas community, he would argue, I think he uses these terms, is to gather around a set of ideas. It's a bounded thing. You can see who's in and out. You can define it. You can close it. Like that to me leads to fundamentalism. It will always lead to fundamentalism. And that's what centering around ideas will do. And if that's what America is, you're going to have fundamentalists to the left of me, to the right of me. Here I am stuck in the middle with you. Crazy fundamentalists everywhere. Right fundamentalists, left fundamentalists, church fundamentalists, religious fundamentalists, non-religious, new atheist fundamentalists. There's flipping fundamentalists everywhere. And to quote one quote, and I won't tell it, I'll end with this quote, put the link. The last remaining acceptable form of bigotry is against those with whom we disagree. That's identitarianism. And it leads to insanity. It leads to babble. It leads to unbelievable chaos. And it's tribalism of a new form. It's racism, but the new race is not the color of your skin. It's the color of your ideas. That's the new racism. It's bigotry. It's bigotry. So, all right, dropping the link. And everybody does it. Pick any. It's thought crime. That's why I call confessionalism proto thought policing. So, all right, feel free. We can go anywhere with this. Feel free to jump in. We can chat about this. I think Abby wants to roll. Sherry can roll. Vivian, come in. A bunch of women come in and tell me how I'm a patriarchal asshole, and then I will maybe push back on that. Am I allowed to have differing opinions from the female, from a girl? Can I? Is it allowed? What up, girl?
Oh, I mean, I'm not going to tell you you're a patriarchal asshole because I'm not a girl, and also because therefore I
Okay.
see, like, the thing that dang it, the light.
My light's terrible too.
Yeah, but I guess my thing on this is it doesn't necessarily bother me if like men talk about femininity, being gentle and like nurturing and like whatever else we associate with the spiritual feminine. The thing that would irritate, because I see that as like every human being had better have that in them and better be able to talk about that, otherwise you're just an unbalanced human. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
then what's irritating is like men, trying to regulate things that specifically have to do with like women's bodies and stuff like that. Like that's where it gets into like, okay, there's a bunch of dudes trying to like say what should happen. But as far as like the spiritual aspect of things is like, okay.
But yeah, but I would even zoom out bigger than that. How about any system? And I don't care who runs it, men, women. Pick your label. Again, pick your label. Whoever's in power over it, regulating anybody's body, telling
Yeah.
anybody what to do with their body. How about that? I mean, like, who gets to pick? And then the individual versus the collective, who gets to decide? And where are those lines with regulating bodies? I mean, that's the big COVID thing and vaccines. Like, you get to tell me I have to be vaccinated? Why? What I put in my body? And I know it's been like politicized the other way, but like it's true. I mean, I do think it's true. You shouldn't. And there's collective. This is the problem in the modern world, is with technology we have such broad reach that like you can have these conversations get to be really complicated. right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like have a lot of I just don't think like on a political or like collective realm it just ceases to make sense to me. I can only conceive of things in kind of like a personal way, and then as soon as stuff gets into too much like politics or like how should the community be run as a whole, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I know what I do and I know what I would recommend for like people who are personally in my life, but there are certain conversations that I just I can't have. And I just watch
It's
video essays on them with people who can, but it's too hard.
it's really I mean, I've said before, I self-identify. Again, I like, if I ever use a label, I like to say self-identify, because
Yeah.
I don't want to absolutize my own analysis and assessment and opinion and desire of a certain identity. I don't want to absolutize it, because then you're allowing for the shadow to come in and bust your ass, essentially. So like, I self-identify as an anarchist, and like another example, like I
Mm.
self-identify as a Christian non-violent person. And so then people will be like, "What about this situation? How would you react in that?" I don't know. I'm talking about how I self-identify. Okay, so
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like, relax. And I think it's really really hard to have, because of politics, and because I would argue that, broadly in the West American world, and because of media in the global technocratic world, the religion is politics, and politics is the opiate of the masses. I think. I mean, to quote Doug Wilson, I think it's true. And so most people we're borderline incapable of having a good faith discussion about political things. Like, it's really really hard. Right, left, pick your label. Almost no one can do it well.
Yeah. I don't even know what that would uh yeah, I don't even know what that would look like because there's just so much like underneath the surface of like different agendas. So a lot of the time when you have something that's like neutral and like good faith, it ends up being um I don't know.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
faith. It's like, it's anything. Good faith is, I would describe it. Somebody was left a comment the other day that was talking about this, like, to talk about these kind of transcendental things, like, that are abstract or conceptual. Their body is, you can't point to it, because they don't have the spirit of things. You can't point to, like, when you're talking to somebody about a tree, you can point to a tree. So like, you can connect the idea of tree with a tree or a cup or whatever. But when you're talking about good faith, you can't point to a tree. However, I think you can point to, or it's like, I use the illustration of that one Supreme Court justice or whatever, when they were trying to define pornography, and he's like, you can't really define it, but I know it when I see it. People know good faith when they experience it.
Yeah, I use that a lot.
I mean, I think that's very
Yeah.
true. And because you can use again, you can use good faith as a label. This is the honest postmodern critique that I think the honest postmodernists had, of using labels that absolutize stuff. And I would again reference that Fundamentalists podcast with Elliot Morgan and Peter Rollins on postmodernism. It's excellent, because that's what they're saying, is if you absolutize a label, you're screwed, because the shadow will come back and kill you. Like, it will. That's what will happen. So like, if you say like, all men are this, all white people are this, all trans people are this, all Republicans are this, and then if you act that way in the world, that's the exclusivist. All Christians are this. You
Yeah.
can't do that. You're absolutizing things. You're excluding the fringe.
Yes. But then
Um,
what did you say was the difference between like normalizing the fringe and then which you said is bad versus like um what did you say, putting heresy or like allowing for heresy or something like that, like what's the
yeah. So I mean, the way that I said it, or the quote, is something like, and whether or not these labels work, because the conservative impulse is to exclude and deny the fringe. So they'll just, I don't know, think like the religious right, moral majority that was just like in America. They just would deny any sort of uh, LGBTQ stuff, just anything. They just anything that made them feel in like a Jonathan Haidt disgust reflex. They would just completely reject and like almost deny its existence. Just get rid of it. But like when you do that, you create these big pendulum shifts. And then I would argue that as a culture, we have shifted completely the other way, where what is in power now, at least through the mass media, is um, the opposite of that. It's like if you say anything that's traditionally that like would have been thought of to be conservative morally in like the 50s or 60s or whatever, you are now excommunicated and excluded and kicked out. Like it's absolutely not okay to have that opinion. You will be deplatformed, you will be kicked out of media things. And to me, like that's why I think people have argued is that we don't really have a right and a left, we don't really have a liberal and a conservative thing. They're both, I think, in the Jonathan Haidt sense, everyone almost in America they're conservatives, they're just conserving different values.
Yeah, I don't know. And I was thinking about this after last. I'm still like trying to come up with some sort of way of conceptualizing politics because it's just terribly confusing. But one thing, like, I am biased because I see things, I'm like biased toward like the left, and that's just the communities that I'm part of. So I guess the way that I interpret it is, for instance, when I see, but then it's because you were saying, or somebody was saying that like the right and the left do the same things, right? And like there's ideology on both sides and stuff. And I think it's true when there's different ways to kind of draw the lines and interpret that depending on like which community you're a part of. Because now that I think of it, there are things that are on the left that I don't agree with, and I kind of just like don't agree with that and don't consider it a part. For instance, people who will like all the infighting, and then people who will like make kind of um oh dang, I don't know, there's just a new kind of like puritanism among people, and but that's how I see it. I don't see it as like this is an inherent problem of progressivism or the left. The only way that I know how to see it is, okay, you've just taken the bad parts of Christianity and fundamentalism and put them over into your political realm. So I'm like, you're being too conservative, we should be more left. But maybe somebody further on the right would be like, oh, that's just an inherent problem of the left. I don't know, I can't really see it that way. But the way that I see it's like, okay, it's not like liberal or like left like enough in the sense that you're just getting infected again by the whole fundamental or by the whole like conservatism.
Yeah. Well, that's how would you define how do you think of fundamentalism? And I mean not just in like a conservative evangelical religious thing. Like that's that's a particular example, right?
Yeah.
But
Well,
what
I
is
think
fundamentalism?
it's like somebody else said, I think Kaido said, it's like not being willing to expand your views. I would just say like idolatry, I guess. What you're clinging to and putting your top priority on is something that is lower down on the scale of things, like the law in some way and some kind of concrete thing. And that's what you're clinging to. And it's like this rigidity. Um, and you can't see beyond that. Like I was just talking to a friend of mine who emailed me, and I had really admired this person in the past and stuff, and then I was talking about certain new ideas that I have, and she gives me the whole, well, if it's against the word of God, then you shouldn't care about other people's opinions, and you just have to care about the word of God and not other people. And to me that's idolatry. It's putting this sort of object above life and above a living like soul, and
Well,
that's
even like
the fundamentals.
you're treating the word of God, you're absolutizing it. Like when she says that, she's saying
Yes,
you're putting whatever above the word of God, as if the word of God is some objective. She's quite literally treating it as some object that she can control and like understand. She's assuming like this is what the word of God is. I understand it. It says blah blah blah
right.
blah blah. and so you're opposed to that, as if the Bible is like a static thing. Again, that's part of that
Right.
objectivist scientific approach to language. It's propositionalism, it's rationalism, it's a form of rationalism, but you could do that with anything, right? You do that with science, like science, the science says, new studies
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
pick
Because
your poison.
the only things that really are eternal and like unchanging in that way are much higher up on this realm to where they contain change on kind of the lower.
You're roboting.
Yeah, and changing. The only like it looks like they're changing all the time on the realm of time and like the flesh and like the physical world. And so I guess that would be the opposite of fundamentalism is you have the good parts of fundamentalism as in there is something that's steady and your identity.
Dang it, is Abby roboting for other
That's
people? I might have to just.
something like I don't know, like
Dang. Okay. I don't know. You were cutting out a bunch for me, so I don't know how much of that I caught. Yeah, Robo.
oh yeah,
Yes, she is.
you're cutting out for me too.
So let's, and maybe if your internet isn't great, you could just like cut out the video. I love the video, but I don't know. I mean, and maybe it'll just clear
Oh,
up. So I don't know what I mean, you were talking about eternal stuff, eternal heavenly things, and then
yeah, like
probably
so
conflating
something that
those.
is something I guess what a fundamentalist person wants is like the stability, something to hold on to that remains the same and everything.
Fear,
And
control.
right, well, and in my experience, what you should have, or there is a possibility to have something steady and unchanging, and to have that peace, but it's higher up, on the scale to where it's like I don't know something like love or something that genuinely you do experience. Or I don't know the fruit of the spirit, like where there is this steadiness, even more so than if you were trying to cling to something lower down, but also it can contain a great amount of transformation while remaining the same. And
Yeah.
the issue is trying to find that kind of thing lower down and just like cling on to it instead of having it like
Mm-hmm.
higher up.
Yeah. Let's go through some of these comments. Sherry was asking some questions, and so I don't want to ignore the comments. So Valis says held an open hand, not a clenched fist. Yep, totally agree. Sherry also says, and I think this is a true thing. Like that's what everyone wants, though. Theoretically, this is like the whole. I'll talk a lot about like the intentions and people wanting to judge intentions, and like because that's what a lot of modern discourse or political discourse and bad faith conversations look like to me, is people judging each other's intentions. There's like this assumption, like the left will say like, like I don't know, pick a topic like healthcare, and it's just like you would think that both the right and the left want the greatest amount of people to be healthy, correct? Like that's just, to me, that just seems like obvious. But I think it's so bad faith to just be for one side or the other to just be like, well, they don't. So like, I mean, I could play act each perspective, like the right would just be like, well, the left doesn't actually care about big health, people actually being healthy because they just want to push like universal health care and monopolized health care and government health care, which doesn't allow for I mean, you could, and then that leads to everybody being sicker. Like America has a terrible healthcare system, and we're not well, And then you could argue the other side, and then you could argue bad faith on the other side. But like that's all missing the point. And I often say like I don't. A pastor said to me a long time ago, I learned a long time ago to stop judging people's intentions. It's just a complete waste of time, and I agree because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like, cool, you have good intentions. Great. I'd rather you have good intentions than bad intentions. But that doesn't mean that what you're advocating is the good. or even God, because like Peugeot said that in his talk at Chino, you know, you can elevate your understanding of the good to God. That's called idolatry. You know, so all right, I'm gonna go find some more like of Sherry's comments. You're interacting via text. I can hear you typing.
Yeah, like multiple things.
Sherry said, "How much of politics manifests the pendulum?" I'm not sure, or like what is. I'm not sure exactly what that question means, or like what is a counterculture.
I have no idea.
I mean, I think politics is just the spirit of politics is the pendulum. It's just this ideological tribal going back and forth, and it's very much a lack of forgiveness, a lack of empathy. It's not the absolute rule of forgiveness, the rule that can withstand its own judgment, which is like, I mean, the right and the left forgiving each other? No, of course they're not. They're just like, damn you to hell. And if we could just essentially kill you, then everything would be better, and we could enter our no place, the utopia, the anti place. You know, I don't know. It's basically how I feel about modern economics or politics. It's a great quote. David Foster Wallace. It's an imprisonment so total that the prisoner doesn't even know he's locked up. Yes, totally. Yeah. See, like, it's just there are some things like even this, I don't. Christ was made perfect by stability and pain and suffering, and perfect equals whole. Yes, there. You know, therefore what? No. Okay, here's counterculture. Nick says, is a culture that moves in opposition to the dominant culture.
But of course, what people will disagree on what the dominant culture is.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
the right seems to think they're persecuted, or Christians seem to think they're persecuted. I don't think Christians are persecuted. They're in power, it seems like. And
Here's my countercultural perspective. I think everyone has a persecution complex. I think everybody thinks they're persecuted.
yeah, I don't know. I don't even. I'm like living such a different kind of life that I don't even know. I I don't really. I guess I'm just countercultural by. Oh, where'd you go? By it's just me. By nature. If you're neurodivergent or autistic, I feel like it's easier to be that way. Okay. Fundamentalism, only the 6 days of work, no Sabbath, but the day of rest can be weaponized too if you just want Sabbath every day. I like that. I like that. Um, that's good.
Which one did you read? Oh, this one.
Yeah, the 6 days of work, no Sabbath. That's cool.
Yeah, and that's probably like I don't know, the idea of jubilee is probably very contra that, you know, freeing all the captives, freeing all the debtors, freeing all this stuff, like, you know, freeing all the oppressors, all the oppressed, you know, because that's the thing. Like that's what Christ and Antichrist can become the same thing. This is where this is a problem that I think can happen among persecuted groups or persecuted persons. You could think about it. You could think about it culturally. You could think about it also individually. You can see yourself as a persecuted person, and then that can become the new power dynamic that allows you to say, like, well, the persecutors now are the bad guys. They're the outcast. They're the ones who must not be forgiven. They must be excluded. They must be kicked out. And arguably, that's the Antichrist that's coming in. It's the shadow of your new absolutizing judgment that you're not seeing that is now coming in to pendulum shift the other way. And I guess I would say, just, I don't know, explicitly, I think that's happened. Like, I think to a large degree that's happened. I don't know exactly where we are in that pendulum swing, um, but I think that's the new currency that has a lot of value for the modern world. All right. Here's a question. What color am I in spiral dynamics? I don't know. What color? I mean, my ego, I suppose. I mean, I feel like I'm in turquoisey-ish realms, but of course I would. That also doesn't mean that I don't. That doesn't mean that I act that way all the time. I will fall down into authoritarian or tribal kind of realms and thinking. I mean, we have all those things, but probably only somebody that's in a turquoise type realm would even acknowledge or admit that. you know like somebody that wasn't in that realm probably wouldn't even see that or admit it. Yeah, I think this is very true. Transformation must always be purchased through suffering. Purchased, gained, acquired. Words are tricky.
Yeah, I think there's this whole slave morality of like that suffering is inherently good, that you can so easily. Right. Yeah. I always say get back in your cocoon, you half-baked butterfly. But
Mm-hmm.
it's more like it just necessarily happens. It's not like it's inherently good to suffer or like you have to suffer. And if you're not suffering, like, oh no, if you're not, great for you. But unfortunately, the state of things is that oftentimes you do have to. And I have a whole video that is like I'm in the process of getting up that's on like pain and different ways of thinking about dealing with suffering. And then there's that idea from Technic and Magic that like a lot of the time the first sign of moving out of the Technic fundamentalism, I guess you could also say, or hell, to life is just pain, because that's kind of like the first way to solving the problem is realizing that you have a problem. A lot of the time it starts with just feeling pain, and then that will cause you to change things, as well as like an attraction to something good. Like it's both, I think. It's going out of something and towards something. But I was thinking about it in terms of my like kind of cult like situation I was in. The people that have stayed in, on one sense, they're suffering more than I, well, certainly suffering more now than I am now. But in another sense, they were able to be complacent because they didn't feel as much of it as I did. They weren't really taking things, they weren't really fully taking things to their utmost conclusion the way I was, which caused me so much pain and caused me to break out of that. So it's interesting. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, well, and then how much the self-awareness, I don't know, Vervaeke talks about these things pretty well too. Like the self-awareness component, I think is key to transformation to some degree. I think for the modern person, it's like for an alcoholic or whatever, the cave you fear to enter holds the answer that you seek, that great Joseph Campbell quote. And you have to be aware of a problem to be able to address it. I
Yeah.
mean, at least probably pretty well. And then so there's conscious and there's unconscious suffering. I think probably what most people are talking about when they're talking about the embrace of Christian suffering is not some sort of like, because I know what you're talking about. There is kind of like a hyper zealot, pietistic, coupled in some kind of weird. I mean, it's probably coupled in like POS theology stuff, where like I
Mm-hmm.
self-loathing, kind of masochistic.
Yeah.
I think of the image of like whipping yourself or whatever that people would used to do. I mean, you can have that kind of thing, but I don't think that's. I would never say that that's healthy Christian transformational suffering. Um,
Yeah.
but there is kind of a Christian, it's very Christ in Gethsemane, and it's very much like a willingness, setting your faith toward Jerusalem, or setting your face toward Jerusalem. Like he takes my life from me. I lay it down on my own accord. Like he's doing it. He's willing it, but he's not offing himself, or he doesn't have self-loathing in with that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin said something about like you you have to fight, you know, till the very last moment. You know, you have to put in the best effort you can to keep kind of what you have, I guess, or to preserve your life, or to keep some good, or whatever you want to say, to beat an illness that you're fighting, whatever. But then at the point where, at a certain point, there's a point where you've done everything you can, and at that point, you have to lay things down and like let it be. So it's not just laying down from the beginning and being like, oh, the universe has ordained suffering upon me, I'm just going to suffer. And it's also not like continuing to hold on even when that's only causing you even more suffering. The image that I was talking about in that video is like, I think this comes from Buddhism, and I completely played with it to where it's no longer a Buddhist thing. But it's like, okay, so pain is when you have your hand in the fire, and it's like the pain of hurting your hand. Suffering is hating the fire and presumably being scared about what the healing process is going to look like, and like all this stuff you add on top of it, rather than just like the actual pain. But then sometimes it's almost necessary to kind of step back or be more self-aware, analyze in order to get out of the situation of pain. So it's interesting.
Yeah, no, I think those are totally legit things. I had a self-compassion workbook thing I've talked about that had this simple equation that was kind of like suffering equals pain times resistance.
Mm.
Where it's essentially like, yeah, you're fighting it. There's some sort of detachment from it. You're divided. You're unintegrated in that experience of that pain to
But
some
maybe
degree.
sometimes suffering. So then maybe one way also of looking at suffering as virtue is sometimes you do resist pain, and then that is redemptive in some way. Like if you see that a situation is unjust, you may choose to not sit there and take it, but to try and do something which will add suffering to your pain, but may change things for you or for others.
Yeah, I mean, it's a I don't like it wasn't a I was trying to think I was trying to relate that to like MLK or even Jesus, because it's not a because Jesus wasn't a doormat either, you know, when people hit him, like he would ask like, why do you hit me?
Yeah, well, I heard that a lot of, and I don't know the source of this, but I heard that a lot of the things he said as far as turn the other cheek and stuff were like really like passive aggressive ways of responding, like
I've heard
forcing
that
them
too.
to confront what they're doing and
Yeah.
being passive about it. But it's like, it was like something like that. It was really impolite to hit, or it made you
The
an equal.
backhand.
Right. Then if you did that, it
Yeah.
was kind of like you're an equal. So it's like forcing them to confront what they're doing. And I guess I experienced similar. There were certain times when was confronted by certain leaders in the old church. The best interactions that I had was where I just kind of sat there silent and let them just kind of say the horrible things they were saying. And I was like, okay, I cannot embarrass you more than you're embarrassing yourself right now. And that was the best way.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a, I think of it, it's somehow related to kind of the proverb, and this is a very Jewish idea. I've talked with Yosef about it some, but the idea of the heaping burning coals thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but it's a hard, I don't know, you have to, like, this is the line between God and mammon. Like, you can't do that. I don't know. Like, you can't do that in a way that is seeking to control and manipulate the thing. Like, even with Jesus, what was Jesus trying to accomplish? Or was he trying to accomplish something? Or was Jesus just so zen and in the moment that he wasn't even thinking about some perceived good or outcome when he responded? You know, I don't know.
And maybe it's both, because this is what I also said. Because though I was kind of comparing two versions of suffering, and one of them was where suffering or pain or evil is kind of like this little box, and if you stay inside of it, you just continue to wander the labyrinth, and you have to kind of get out of it in some sense in order to then change it and resolve it. And the other image is this thing where, okay, pain is where you just sit there and you're going through it. Suffering is if you add all these other things. And I think like both of those are true in different contexts, and also each contains the other in a way. If you go deep enough into one, you can find the other and kind of say it in those terms. Like, and I guess in this case, you're thinking of the process of like labor and birth, because, you know, when you're thinking of that process, which is something that you, it's kind of like you're in the moment, right, and like trying to go with that process, but also through being present and like being in tune with the whole process of it, you do accomplish something. Like you're not just sitting there passively. Not that I have ever or plan to be ever in labor, but it's like both, right? And that's an image that's used a lot to talk about the transformation of the universe. And also that verse about like striving according to his working, which worketh in me mightily. So at the most essential, like most peak moment, I guess you get both, where it's almost like through being so utterly in the moment and utterly just feeling the fire and being in it, you're also getting out of it or like going through the process that will then transform it and transform you and cease the suffering. Or, yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, to quote Garth Brooks, life is not tried, it is merely survived if you're standing outside the fire. It's I think that's very true, and I think that's very well said. I gotta plug Chad here because he's wanting me to plug him and his premiere at 12:12 Central. Chad, let's see. Oh, Dolly, let's go. Let's highlight some Dolly here. I think it becomes painful when you decide to go through it, and hopefully grow through it. But resisting the suffering itself, refusing to go through it, is way more painful.
Yes.
Yeah, I think very true. Because it's just. I mean, that's probably a good, labor, giving birth analogy. Like, it's gonna happen. Like you're gonna fight it. You could fight it, I guess, or try to, but that's just gonna suck.
Yeah. And
Right.
sometimes I think that process of going through it looks more like resistance, like, because it gets to the thing of like victim blaming, I guess. Because say you're in an abusive situation, like in your family, with a spouse, with an organization that you're part of. Some people might say you should stay in there. You should try to love those people and you need to stay in there. And this is, your calling or whatever, or that's your family, or that's your spouse, or that's your parents, and you have to stay in. And that might, to me, on the outside, that to stay in would look like just being there and going through and suffering in a good way. But what's actually
Yeah.
going on is the real transformative suffering process in that case is like breaking the cycle and getting out, which is also a great suffering. And it's also like I don't know, that's to me the virtuous kind of suffering in that case, where is like it looks more like resistance and breaking things up, and no, you need to just suffer it. It's like, well,
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's those absolutizing judgments that I think inhibit one's own, one's life to be their own personal journey. Because I don't think you can it's kind of like with deconstructing Christians or Christians who are I mean, not Christian, X. Any person in any X group who is beginning to see things and change and evolve in ways where they maybe no longer cohere with, again, because we're all these communitarians, identitarians, we're all circled around these ideas. And what if you're in a group where all of a sudden all the ideas you don't agree with or you're starting to have different thoughts with? Well, should I stay or should I go now?
yeah,
I don't know. There can't be, I don't think you can write a prescription that absolutely works. Again, it's a law.
yeah, no,
You
you have,
can't make a law that works for everyone in every case.
yeah,
And then I think discerning that's where I really resonated to go back with that Steve guy's video, at least in that middle phase, which he calls the woke phase. I mean, again, like please don't get caught up on the labels. People like get caught up on the labels and then they just like they're stuck. It's like it's with their programming. It's like all of a sudden does not compute and like it's a malfunction. Like because they just freak out on a label. Call it whatever you want. The middle phase. Will that like stop someone? Does that get beyond our computers malfunctioning? The middle phase where you're thrown into the chaos of, you can think of this in any terms. We were talking about this a little bit in the Boxer. Like Richard Rohr will call it he calls it the boxes of stages of development or something. And he has these terms for like boxes, which are essentially like order, chaos, reorder.
you know, and like that's just the pattern that everybody goes through. You're in this place of order where everything makes sense, everything checks, you know, the system, but then all of a sudden you're thrown into this place of disorder where, oh, I don't know, I'm like, I don't know what I think about all this stuff, where everybody's in this same thought group. And then when you go through that process of deconstruction and reordering, does that mean, when and where does that mean you could stay in the group, or you're going to get kicked out the group? I don't know. Like in my own church experience, that's like exactly what happened. And I've told the story before, my worst church experience, when I was talking about all this stuff with my pastors and other people in the church and processing around the doctrine of hell. And I was upfront about all of it, so they, you know, were cool with me doing it for a while. But and I've said this before, like they were cool with me doing it because like eventually they figured like I'd figure it out and I'd come back to like the right view, right? The correct view, their view. But then when I didn't, you know, they got to a point where they were no longer comfortable with that tension, right? They wanted to somehow resolve that tension. And so then the pastor like said to me, he just automatically assumed, well, maybe we should just, you know, help you find a church where you know, where he's like, where you fit in better. And I immediately see, like, that whole game, I don't want to play. I've never wanted to play that game. And I was like, I don't want to find another church. Like, I would like to stay in this church with different opinions. And it was like, for him, like, that just didn't, like, he couldn't even countenance that because he just wasn't, he couldn't understand a unity that involved actual ideological multiplicity.
Yeah,
Like, he
and I
couldn't
guess
make
what I'm
sense of that.
thinking about is more like situations in which one person is getting abused, more like emotionally or spiritually, because that's mostly what I've been in. But yeah, I mean, as long as you're able to still live your life and be comfortable, then it could be beneficial to stay in a community that's ideologically different. Or maybe you could leave because you could do more good elsewhere. It just depends on the person.
So this is, I have to highlight this because I am obsessed with Cormac. So Vivian, Cormac McCarthy is probably my favorite author. The Road is probably my favorite book. Blood Meridian is brilliant, but it's very, I don't know. It's more like it's a, I don't know. It's more academic-y. Like it's really great. But it's the kind of book most academics and smart people, educated, literate people say it's like his magnum opus, his greatest work. I disagree. The book's simpler and much more universal, I think, and better, I would argue, because of probably those things. But I love Cormac. I mean, there's some great Cormacs. If you like Cormac, I recommend this a lot to people. I have it clipped on my YouTube channel, but he has I think it's the last interview that he gave before he died, memory eternal. But he talks about the unknown. There's this part where he talks about the unknown and this idea of, he talks about it brilliantly, where he's just, because it's so connected to things I think about all the time, where like when you're talking to somebody and they're like, and this happens all the time, where they'll just be like, you know, what is it? How to say it? So they have an idea of something that is pre-verbal. Like they can't put it into words. It's an idea that is wordless, but it's something. It's just pre-articulate. And then he goes on to talk about that, you know, and it's phenomenal. It's just really good stuff. Cormac was, I don't know, he was really great, really great. Anyhow, love that guy. All right. Well, so what's bigotry?
Asking me what's bigotry?
Yeah.
Well, I was just watching a movie, a review of a movie that's this terrible homophobic Christian movie that actually ends up looking pro gay, and it was very funny, and it's an awful movie, like tiny budget, hilariously acted, very bad, etc. I was just watching for fun, but it did involve the term bigotry, and they defined it as, I think, hating another group of people just like because they're different and like being biased against them purely because of difference. It's not a term that I use a lot in my daily life. But I guess, yeah, just seeing one kind of not moral, just like just a characteristic of people that doesn't actually have a moral value. Like, not something like, oh, this person goes around hating people, therefore I don't like them. That wouldn't be bigotry. That's just setting healthy boundaries for yourself. But like, oh, that person has a bunch of tattoos and I don't, that's bad. And being against them and then making a blanket judgment.
Yeah. I think that's a blanket judgment. That's because that's probably the way I would define it. It's an absolutizing judgment
Yeah.
of anything, you know. So okay, we have a taker. Yeah.
That's more like
Closed hand.
fundamentalism. But I think they go together. But I would say
Yeah.
that's fundamentalism.
Yeah, bigotry, fundamentalism is more like the spirit, the pattern of bigotry or something. Bigotry is like the, I don't know, the judgment, and I don't know. They're really close, super related. All right, well, I don't know. I might just. Do you have more you want to say or talk about, or what should we? I don't know. The masculine, feminine aspects of it. That's an area, I don't know. I just feel like there's tons of gold to be had in that area, but it's also just such a landmine place because I'm very aware of many current although I would say that they're tacit laws that you just cannot transgress in those areas, and it's essentially like an implicit thought policing around ideas of masculinity and femininity where like I can imagine certain things people would say and people would just like it would just shut down the conversation and people would lose their minds. And it's not, and I think it's things that are outside of the typical binary of like we need to just, because this is the way that I usually hear like the gender war stuff talked about, is that there's all these like, it's very much like the film of, have you seen the film Don't Worry Darling?
No.
Oh my gosh, I would love to know what you think about that movie. So it's like Harry Styles and what's her name directed it, and she was in House. What the heck's her name? Olivia Wilde, I think, directed it.
It has very low ratings.
Well, I mean,
I
don't know. Depending on who you ask, it's probably great. I mean, I see it. I think that it's an incredibly well done piece of propaganda. I think. It's I don't know. It's an interesting film. Well, then I just biased you maybe, or told you at least my opinion about it. But it's
So
a
you
good.
think it's like anti-patriarchy propaganda?
Yeah,
Okay.
essentially. And it has a lot of assumptions into it. I mean,
patriarchy.
I mean, I don't want to give the see, because again, that's the thing. It's like the healthcare thing that we were talking about earlier. It's just like you can say like people that are pro patriarchy in a way that they're just like they love men, they're misogynists, they hate women, they want to see women repressed, they want to go back to like a Pleasantville 1950s, barefoot pregnant, making food in the kitchen. And it's just like, is that what we're talking about? Or is that like I mean, maybe some people want that. I don't probably think that's the norm of people that would be classified within the patriarchy. So then like, that's the thing is like in your anti-bigotry, are you being a bigot? Like, and how does all that kind of stuff work?
What I've heard of is the patriarchy. The video that I like on it is by the student. It's like called the patriarchy for men or something, but he calls it the gender matrix, and so that he doesn't express it in a way that's like patriarchy, because that term shuts a lot of people down.
Yeah,
and
it
he
does.
says it's like just where the gender matrix is just where, depending on what like body you're born into, then you're expected to be funneled into one of the two, and you get bullied if you're not. And
Yep.
That's the gender matrix. And of course, it does involve like men being in position of power, but it also involves men not being able to show emotions and stuff. So everybody gets harmed, and that's the matrix. And that's
Yeah. So, well, we could maybe go here. So like, I think this is true. we'll see what you think of this. But I would say that having, okay, how to say this in a way that is good and clear. I think essentially like cancel culture or excluding people based off of ideas and then relationally shutting them out, like dead naming them in any way, either any direction, I would
There's a
argue is
difference between dead naming somebody and okay, so this is how I see the whole thing. Like, this is what I like tolerance. So the whole tolerance thing is a social contract. Like you're in the circle, and if you're in the tolerance circle, then you like tolerate other people. If you don't, if your worldview is like about not tolerating other people. For instance, if you are racist and you hate black people, and you say, "Why can't I be tolerated? Why don't you tolerate my opinions the same way as I'm expected to tolerate your opinions?" No, your opinion is intolerance. You can't go in there. It's not just like tolerance isn't like a law, it's something that we participate in. And if you're not participating in it, then you have to set boundaries with that person because they're like destructive. Like it's a it's a thing you participate in. So yeah.
well, that gets into the kind of the harm, probably the harm debate of like what is harm and is it like intellectual harm, psychological harm, versus physical harm? Like, is disagreeing with someone harm? So, like, if you, let's say you have racist opinions, but you don't, like, you don't seek to systematically impose those or enact violence on
You
whatever
would
you
though,
deem to be
right?
an
Because then you
inferior
would probably
race.
vote for people who are doing that. You would want to do that. I mean, if I was racist, I would want to bring about my ideal worldview of racism.
Yeah, but there's like, there's weird, oh man. See, like, this is where it's hard because like I have thoughts. So like I have thoughts about this topic and would potentially dare to enter into them. But I just don't, and it's not that I don't even think, well, is it? Do I think you and I are capable of doing it? I don't know. Like I don't know that we're capable of doing it really well. Because like it gets into like is there hmm, are there areas is it possible to have it's all like all these cultural layers of like segregation or something, right? The segregationists, people who want to keep things segregated. You could argue, like, at worst, that they were just doing it merely out of racial things, but also, like, positively, they were doing it out of a want and a desire to keep, uh, to, to keep some degree of enough of a body of their own culture to not have their culture just disappear, like the way these conversations are happening right now in like Britain, for example. Like I don't know if
Right. I just
I
have
don't
trouble with that because I'm kind of like a little alien in this whole circumstance. Just the way that I live and who I am, I don't really fit into a lot of groups. So I'm kind of observing from without, and I'm like, oh, okay, culture. Like, I guess if I was in Britain, I would probably, I don't know, I would try to just relate myself personally to each group. But then I don't know, it's hard. I have to get some water real quick, but yeah, it's
okay,
a really hard like discussion for me to have.
yeah, I agree totally. So let me go back to she's getting water. I'm gonna look at some comments. The one idea that I was trying to get to that I couldn't, I think it's arguable. I don't honestly know what I think about this yet, that the idea of cancel culture and canceling people based off of their ideas isn't the patriarchy, it's the matriarchy. It's the malevolent matriarchy. I think excluding people and then emotionally ostracizing them and shaming them, um, based on what their opinions are about things is is a is the negative spiritual feminine. And so I think you could make an argument that we live in a matriarchy, just as much as we live in a patriarchy. I mean, I just think there needs to be a lot more. That conversation is very low resolution, is what I think. All right. Let's go look at some comments. I'm sure whatever, that would probably piss people off. Let's see. Total tolerance is Brave New World sexual morality.
Yay.
All right.
Sexual morality.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. I've not read Brave New World, so even though I'll talk about things, and my wife has, my son has. Hierarchy too is such a, like, I was talking with my friend the other day about hierarchy. I don't know. I would argue there's different kinds of hierarchy. I think healthy hierarchies are where the higher serves the lower, and the higher is willing to die for the lower in the hierarchy. It's not like a better than, less than, zero-sum competition thing rooted in like scarcity and red and tooth and claw American. It's not within that ethos. I mean, like, that's a certain kind of hierarchy that's very American. But I think there are healthy hierarchies that aren't playing that game, that zero-sum game. So, and I think this comment, Vivian, is talking about that kind of hierarchy, which I don't affirm. Most people with no boundaries are subversive. Well, again, like, I don't think it's impossible. You can't have no boundaries.
Yeah, you have to have boundaries.
I mean, there's not freedom and constraint. You need both things. You can't understand either without the other. You need both. But I mean, I think I know what you guys are talking about. Like even this, people with no boundaries tend to psychopathy, or they tend to like mania, and probably, I don't know, schizophrenia or something, maybe. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but Patriarchy and Me. That's like a good children's show. I can think of it. The Patriarchy and Me. Yes, here we go. Shunning is a very old religion. And I don't know, I guess this is a little bit of like the exclusivist religion of the right side of history, but like, and maybe it's a spiral dynamics thing. I just think we're beyond that. Like, I mean, I understood the place for it, but I just think like that time is past for shunning, maybe. Oh, this is a great Dostoevsky quote, right? I mean, that seems to me like that Zosima quote from Brothers Karamazov. Luke is right, correct. You can argue both, yeah. Nico, if your kid is bad, and if your kid does something bad, don't you punish them? You understand that things exist inside a context, and your discussion has no context? This discussion? I mean, yeah. I mean, I think the Bible says that, the good father punishes those he loves,
Well,
the
it's
people
just
you
like
don't
there's
care about.
consequences, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you're, I mean, obviously, I don't know what exactly people mean when they say cancel culture. I know that sometimes and the way that I normally see this is a lot of infighting where people will just have this knee-jerk reaction and attack and attack and attack and even attack each other. And it gets really ugly. And that's bad. But then there's like something in which, okay, if you have views, and I'm just going to use racism because it's easier, because I think we could all more easily agree that that's bad. But like, if you're a white supremacist, then if you're not quote unquote canceled in some way, like the natural consequence of that is then for people who have more egalitarian views not to listen to you, not to want you influencing, vulnerable people, and not to want you having a bunch of votes that are going to then influence politics to, I don't know, do white supremacist things and like shun people of color. There has to be some sort of consequence for that, because it's not just an opinion, it's an action, it's a force that you're putting out into the world of destruction toward people of other races. There has to be consequences for that.
Well, and part of that is I mean, I would argue as an anarchist, part of that is the problem that everything is too centralized in our government. Like, I would be an anarcho-syndicalist. So like if you're a white supremacist and you want to have like a little group of white supremacists, then cool, go do that in your little own thing.
Right. Well, but you've
And
canceled them, right? You said do that in your little own thing.
but not canceled them. It's just like I don't want to participate in that. So if you have a bunch of people that want to participate in that, go have a body over there, interact with the other bodies in ways that they are willing to. But
Right.
like,
And
but you
maybe
can't in America. It's just like everybody has to do that because we vote on things and we have federal laws and we elected a president, and it's just like boom, top down
yeah.
hegemony.
Yeah,
Everybody's
so in
gotta do
that circumstance, the best that you could do is kind of to try and make sure that someone doesn't have a huge platform and isn't like everything's, isn't causing huge destruction on a wide scale. And it's not perfect, it'd be better if we could put them in their own little commune, I don't know, but you can't. So I guess that's the best you could do is try and cancel them or make sure they're
it.
not radicalized. I don't know, do what people do against white supremacists.
Well, I mean, yeah, like you don't. They have no right, I think, to impose their views and make everybody live within their
Right.
little,
And
their
for
world.
instance, with canceling people on gender, like, okay, I have an opinion about traditional marriage that it's between one man and one woman. What that translates to is you're going to vote against trans rights, you're going to vote against marriage, you're going to try to overturn the gay marriage thing, etc. It's not just an opinion, it's an action that you're putting forth in the world.
Yeah,
And it
but
has consequences.
what becomes hard about that, and that's why I talk about center. I like to talk about centers and peripheries, and where I am probably more conservative in like the Chestertonian fence in the field way, is that also traditional man and women relationships are what create human beings. And like there's a reason for that. There's a reason to normalize that within your society because that's how human beings will continue. As long as you value human beings continuing. And arguably,
Well, I don't think
like
there's a need to normalize it. Like, it'll happen anyway. I mean, even a lot of gay couples will want to adopt or to have like a surrogate or to do something like
but there will
people,
be nobody to adopt.
or they'll have like sperm donors and stuff. Like, people, you don't have to like normalize it to force people to keep having kids. Like, people are gonna do that. It's fine.
But arguably, I mean, fertility rates are going down. Have you looked at the rate of
I don't know
fertility?
why, but it might be because everything's so expensive now and people can't afford kids, and that's
I
whole
think
deal.
I think there's a lot of factors. I think there's environmental factors. I think there are chemicals in the water. People talk about phthalates in the water. Shauna, what's the girl's name? There's some doctor that like does all this research on measuring perineum length because that's one of the biggest ways to differentiate between biological sexes within a species. The difference is shrinking in like all sorts of species. There's a lot. I don't know. I think there's a lot of factors going on with that, but like one of the greatest articles I've ever read on it is Gabriel Marcel, who is this French existentialist, wrote, and well, it was a lecture actually, but it's in this book that I have, and it's called Technology and the Sacral. It's flipping phenomenal. But yeah, it's a complicated thing. I think it's like anything. Be careful of the words you use. You start out using them, and they end up using you. Be careful what you normalize. You normalize something, and all of a sudden, it starts normalizing you. All right. No, there's a lot of I can't follow the comments. It's like only in the West, Luke. What only in the West? There's no such thing as just an opinion. It's just your opinion, man.
Yeah.
Your worldview is an arena that unfolds you to any action at all. Yeah, somewhat. It's like it's your your attention, your vision, your worldview affects your attention. And your attention affects it's where you orient toward the future. Like it is this arena in which you act. You can't act where you're not paying attention. So sure.
Oh yeah, that's true. Attention. That's cool. I'm not sure patriarchy is. So somebody says, oh yeah, so okay, then there's another thing where they're kind of conflating different opinions with like certain people who will hate or fight against other groups of people. Like they're and maybe that's just in this current like climate, you can't like there's a difference between having a different opinion and like I don't know, being bigoted or being a fundamentalist. You can be different. Like you can be gay or you can be straight, and that's a difference. But both of those can be together in tolerance, or both of those can be opposed. You know, if gay people are like, you shouldn't be able to have kids anymore and you shouldn't be able to be straight, and straight people are like, you shouldn't be able to be gay, then that would be bad. But whereas if, you know, in the best parts of the current climate, people can be gay or people can be straight, that's a difference. Yes, you can have different opinions. Just don't be like trying to eradicate everything else. And if someone is trying to eradicate you, then you have to do something about that so as not to get eradicated. I don't know.
Okay, poor Nico keeps asking for, he just keeps saying context, people, context. I don't know. Context of what? I need context for your context.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? And Vala says that's a double empathy problem. I don't know what that is. Yeah, I don't know. We touched on way too many topics, but like this is, so I would argue, zooming out, looking at the thing behind the thing, this is the problem of why I think it's hard to have good faith conversations around certain key.
Chad, what the heck? My guy.
What?
I don't think. He's all, I think Abby would quicker shun a person than the person they believe will shun them. Do you? Do you really? Because you're talking to the person who stayed in the old church that I was in for 2 years, spending really my heart's blood trying to be in that place. And to the person who dated someone for several months, again, spending my heart's blood attempting to have a communion with them. And to the person who stays in this community despite a lot of people causing me to feel like oh, great. And a lot of that is just trauma responses, and I recognize that, which is why I stay. And you're talking to the person who is still attempting to talk to my friend who's Bible thumping me. No, I
Listen, guys, Vivian is telling us it's so easy to have good faith conversations. So just
it
do
is
it.
easy
It's
when
just
you're
really
a good
easy.
person. It is easy when you're someone who comes like, I think if you're at a level of I don't know, self-awareness or like openness as a person, then it kind of is common sense. But whereas if you're somebody like certain people that I know, you're just like, you can't get to the heart of them, and it's just really hard because they just hit you with all the thought terminating cliches. Like me and my friend here cannot have a good faith conversation like fully like I could with one of you, because she has this thought terminating cliche of the Bible, and she will hold that in front of her face, just preventing her heart from getting to mine and mine from getting to hers. So it's as good faith as it can be, but it's not as much as in this community because there's like a wall up.
Well, and I don't know, that's really what I want. I don't know, that's why I participate in this community and what I want it to be. It reminds me of, so the Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, that chapter 2 I love to talk about, which is, he says, I probably have it here somewhere where I could quote it, but he essentially says, like, he starts the chapter by saying, no one will listen to you unless they want to. And he's just like, let me repeat that. If you get nothing else from this chapter, only get that. No one will listen to you unless they want to. And so like, and I think that's very true. Like, it's just that's just a reality, because knowing as you are known and relational knowing, like, people won't listen to you, truly listen to you, unless they want to hear what you're saying, unless you have the kind of relationship and trust and faith where there's the reciprocal opening to really hear what you're saying in that agapic mode, and vice versa. And so like, if people intuit that you are, I don't know, judging them or condemning them or putting them in some category, which, like, I would say, I think you probably feel that way with Chad's comment. Like, you can't ever be that. You're gonna automatically shut down any sort of good faith conversation, because, like, saying that, I would say, as like my 88th percentile compassion thing, like, you say that to Abby, she's not gonna be able, even it's gonna shut her down, most likely. Because in that moment, when somebody's saying something that's very hard to hear, it takes an unbelievable amount of humility, even if it's wrong. Let's just say it's like 80% wrong for the sake of argument. I believe there's truth in like pretty much anything that's said if you have eyes to see it.
It's kind of a thing that I think is a certain pattern, especially among older conservative people, where they will look at somebody who has unusual views and maybe who is expressing their opinions for the first time in their life or setting boundaries for the first time in their life and immediately like attack that. And it's hard to hear because, you know, internally I'm always very self-aware of what I'm doing, and I'm always pushing myself honestly beyond what I should be doing and beyond necessarily what's healthy for me, to be open and to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Especially as an autistic person, you do that very easily. And so I know that that's what's going on the inside. And then it's like, as soon as I do one thing that's like setting something down, people are like, oh, you're attacking, you know, you're shutting people down, you're doing it. I'm like, oh my God. But yeah, I mean, obviously in like 10 years, I'd be able to better respond to that kind of thing. I'm also very young and not very good at articulating things, etc. right now. And, you know, I kind of have to roll my eyes. It's like, okay.
Yeah, it's an incredibly, I feel like I have, because so to bring back that image of in that middle area where you're in this chaos of discernment and really being able to, I have a hard time with that very much so, in setting boundaries, in knowing when, because I think it's a hard thing to do of when to, it's not, I like to characterize it between judgment and discernment. Like at what point, because I have like savior complex stuff, I have this gospel of just try harder. So like sometimes I can have interactions with people or ongoing interactions with people where I feel like if I'm just more vulnerable with this person, if I just say this in a different way, if I do this, if I do that, if I'm more Christ-like, if I try to hear what they're telling me, even if they're doing it really poorly, better, if I blah, 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 blah. It's essentially like a control thing. Like if I do everything right, then eventually this will work. And I think I'm finally getting to the point in my life where I'm like, that's, you know, it's maybe not true. And I think there are times where it's okay.
That's what's also going on with the whole cancel culture thing, is like at a certain point, the amount of grace that you can give someone, there's a difference in the way you're approaching it. You know, you're giving 80% and they're giving nothing because they're a fundamentalist. You have to make some sort of adjustment.
Well, and maybe, but like there's so many things. Like my problem is the learned ignorance. Like I think I am at the point, like I know that Lilith quote that I love to talk. I know I don't know. I know I don't know a lot of things, but then that puts you in this liminal place of like, well, then how do you make judgments? Because, and I often think about like films like Arrival or the film Prisoner or something.
I love Arrival.
Yeah, Arrival's very good, but like Prisoner is even better to this point because, and I mean, I don't want to give it away completely, but you could almost argue that the film Prisoner, which is a very hard, it's about like child abduction and stuff, and so like it's a tough film, it's a thriller, it's really, really good. It's one of my favorite films of recent memory, but a lot of people can't watch it because it's just the subject matter.
Yeah.
But you could argue that film is an artistic, it's a story, but one of the big things that the art is making you wrestle with is judgment. And like, and that movie will mess with your sense of judgment and right and moral righteousness, because it'll turn shit on its head because that's just the thing, what you see and hear. Like, how do you know? It's the Solzhenitsyn thing. How do you know that you're on team righteous?
Yeah, the only way I know is just constantly monitoring whatever my actions are bringing.
Right. And I think a lot of people say that, but then it's like, this is like a Ted S made this point somewhat at one point. Like that's the great white throne judgment. That's God's rule. That's going to happen at the end. And so like, yes, you can't ever know those things in an absolute way now. Yeah, you can discern fruit, but arguably everybody wants to, because I hear because theoretically within the Christian realm, I could hear people on different sides of an issue saying that. Well, we just got to measure the fruit, and they both think they're doing it, and they both think they're on team right, and they have opposite views.
That's
So,
still, you
like,
still have to measure the fruit, though. It's just a better
Yeah.
discernment of what the fruit is. I mean, that's still the method. It's just doing it right. Angels look like demons. Demons imitate angels. That doesn't mean angels have to be ugly. Angels are still beautiful, even though demons are also beautiful too.
yeah, totally, totally. All right, well, I'm probably gonna cut this off. I don't know. I would love to be able to have more conversations about gender and femininity and masculinity and what, but like I don't know. I don't know that people are really capable of doing it very well, and without people just coming in and losing their minds, and or me losing my mind. But I think we need to. I think that's an area we need to dive into more. But okay, well, let's just wait. We're having a criticism. Let's highlight some criticism. Like Nick, what verses are you thinking of? Get out of our Abby. You have a beautiful heart. I agree.
Apparently, a heart full of rejecting people and disgust. Yay.
I mean, you know, what are we gonna do? And there's other times he says,
Yeah, it's true. It's both. But it's like, it reminds me of Proverbs, because in Proverbs, Proverbs is all about discernment. And there's so many things, even where it's like, answer a fool according to his folly. Don't answer a fool. It's like, it's all the spirit and it's all discernment. And that gets right back to fundamentalism, which is the law versus the spirit, which can be the same and yet have integrate total opposites. So there really is no shortcut. There's no like shortcut or replacement for that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think that's a good word to end on. You said it better than I could have. So, thanks for joining me, Abby, and thanks to everyone else. Lee, there was people who watched this later. Check out the live chat because there was a lot going on, stuff that I didn't even see, for sure, because it was busy. And then also leave comments so that this can be a mutually edifying thing and people can engage in it. I wish more people engage in the comments. Lurkers, engage. You don't have to come on and show your face. Engage in the comments. All right, peace out, everyone. God bless.
Ciao.